Hi. Hi, I am Eugen, and together with Dmitry, we're going to talk about something new in the Sling ecosystem, how to do modern authentication with Sling. Who here in the room is familiar with OpenID Connect and single sign-on technologies? Can I show? OK, a few of you guys. Good, good. So the idea is that the software world is changing, and patterns and technologies come into play, they fade away, and they get back renewed. The software field is kind of new compared to other fields like constructions and cooking, which are older than 2,000 years old. And those fields have matured, and now if you want to build something, a building, or if you want to cook a dish, you use prefabricated components. Okay, you don't start doing your mortar and your bricks, or you grow and hunt your food every day. Okay, we do this for fun, but not every day. And something like this is emerging in the software industry. But we are young, we are almost 50 years old right now, so we still have a lot of time to grow and to discover the patterns that work best for us. The current patterns are to move things to cloud and microservices, but there are a lot of challenges with doing so. And we are going to talk about some of the challenges that we faced and what solutions we came up with. OK? So just a second. OK. So the idea is that you don't have to build everything yourself. Use the pre-existing applications in your ecosystem and build your software or your product that way. This saves time and is more economic. And if it's one thing that you should take away from this presentation is this slide here. In terms of Sling, we can use Sling to handle what it does best, meaning that Sling should handle the content. And for all of the other parts of the application, you can use whatever system or component that you want to do. And use something to integrate these services, these microservices, to work together. And that should be the focus of this talk today. More specifically, the part with authentication. Because, well, in God we trust, all else we authenticate. And of course, some people don't even trust a God. So, yeah. My journey that led me to this part so far is that I worked to develop a SaaS platform. It's called Great People Inside. We develop assessments for employees. So people take an assessment, and based on the results, we generate a report that HR people can see if they are a good fit for a certain position or not. Or the people who take the assessments themselves, they can find out what are the best jobs that they will find fulfilling for them. Okay, so we started with a monolith, and we closely started breaking the monolith into microservices. But we had an issue of whenever we didn't use Sling, we are migrating to Sling, and our issues were that whenever we had some translation changes or some other content changes, we had to make a release, and after that, we had to deploy it into production. And of course, just for translation changes, this is not the best thing. So to do that, we had to find a solution, and we found Sling. The idea is that we have a bunch of services, and also we want to introduce Sling, but we want to have a seamless experience for the user so they don't have to log in into 3 different systems altogether. So this is why we ended up finding an integration for Sling and all other microservices. So we had a few goals, both business and technical. I'm not going to talk about the business challenges that you will face because, well, who cares? And no time. So I'm going to pass my talk to Dmitry, who is going to talk about some of the technical challenges that you will face if you want to make this journey as well. Dmitry?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So we have talked a bit about the importance of authentication. It is quite obvious. And let's move to the complexity of modern authentication. Let's ask ourselves a question, how complex it is. So one might say, well, authentication, small authentication. You've got a table with usernames with hashed passwords, and voila, and here you go. Well, OK, but how about, for example, forbidding automated registrations and enforcing high-quality passwords and prohibiting dictionary-based ones? How about integrating with social networks and third-party identity providers? How about connecting to external user stores, including legacy ones? How about single sign-on? How about multifactor authentication, for example, using smart cards, which might be very important for governmental bodies? Well, maybe some of this is already implemented in Sling. Let's take a look. Not that much. So yes, we can configure LDAP on the auth level, or even several LDAP directors. Yes, that's it. So now let's ask ourselves another question. Do we really want to implement any of the above in Sling, let alone all of the above? Probably not, because it will take time, first. And second, you will inevitably reinventing the wheel. Luckily, there exists an approach that has existed for years in the world, and maybe it's right time to bring it to the Sling world. The approach is you deploy a separate entity that implements all of the above. You integrate with it, preferably with the help of open and standard protocols. I'm sorry. And you let it do its job. You delegate everything to the identity and access management system. So this is the basic workflow. We will be focusing on the second and on the third steps, because deploying the IAM system is clearly out of the scope of our talk. So integrating is, in fact, a multi-aspect problem. And we will be focusing on the 3 main aspects, namely authentication, authorization, and user provisioning. Let's start with authentication. Imagine a classic setup. So yesterday's session has demonstrated that probably nobody has intolerance for UML. So here's a nice sequence diagram. So how things work with classical setup. You go to a protected resource at the application, you authenticate with the application, and you are let in. Simply, that's it. When we introduce an external entity, things start to become a bit more complex. So you try to access an application. Upon unauthenticated access, you are redirected to external identity server. You pass the authentication procedure, and you are redirected back with some piece of cryptographic information that might be called ticket or token or assertion, depending on the protocol. And then you have to present this piece of cryptographic information to the target application as your credentials. So that's it. The bars filled with magenta here depict something new that we need to bring to our architecture. Everything is more or less obvious with the IAM, so the large magenta bar. And on the application level, there are 2 pieces of code that need, first, to process redirect, and second, to process this cryptographic document, to validate the ticket and to let the user in. Normally, this is implemented as a single module, which is called an adapter. So all these interactions are defined by a protocol and implemented by an adapter. But I think it's enough UML. I'm sorry. And I hope we should be ready for our first demo.
We have a live version of the application installed, but we kind of broke it this morning, so maybe we can.
As always.
Yeah.
So what just happened? I have typed in a URL of my local Sling deployment. We have configured all the Sling content to be protected. So instead of standard Sling login screen, we see something that is kind of niftier, more cool. So I log in as an admin. I'm taken back, and the user is recognized. I'm in. So this is the very first demo. Obvious question, what was that? OK, that was Sling. Yeah, all right. All the redirection stuff was done by OpenID protocol, defined by OpenID protocol. And authentication was handled by Keycloak. Well, why Keycloak? There are a lot of identity solutions in the world. Well, I'm awfully sorry for the image quality. At the last moment, I had to borrow this ancient laptop from my mom. So we had to do the VGA connection. OK, so there are a lot of identity solutions in the world, either cloud-based or on-premises, either commercial or open source and free. But why Keycloak? Well, because of that, because it either implements all of the above out of the box or is extensible enough to allow for relatively and comparatively easy implementation if you miss something. And it is free as in free speech. And it's backed by Red Hat, a well-known industry player. So for protocols, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, they do not offer us such a wide choice. In fact, there are 3 major single sign-on protocols, namely OpenID Connect, SAML, and CAS. While assessing the draft version of our slides, Lydia from Provision has asked us explicitly to substantiate our choice of the protocol, and second, to liven our presentation a bit, to make it less dry. So, Lydia, if you are here, there we go. And 2 birds with 1 stone. Well, this is our take on that kind of infamous picture. So I find this graphical metaphor suitable for that case. We'll be talking about protocols a little bit. So what about SAML? Yes, it comes from the enterprise world, the world of XML-based web services. And only after that, it has been retrofitted for the web. You can still find and encounter SAML in large enterprise applications. And if you need to integrate with them, so probably SAML could be the protocol of your choice. It is indeed very feature-rich. So there are features that only start to emerge in other protocols that have existed in SAML for years. Yes, it is heavyweight because it's based on XML and a bit verbose. One necessary moment to note, the back channel, this term is used in the scope of protocols. That means whether the target application needs connectivity to the identity server. So SAML-based systems are able to function without that. So everything goes through the user's browser. So back channel is generally not required. While SAML is just ideal for classical web applications, it doesn't play very well with REST-based web services. So this should be taken into account. On the other hand, OpenID Connect was, from the very beginning, the first-class web citizen. It is based on its predecessor named just simply OpenID, which is deprecated. So the current version is called OpenID Connect, and they are not compatible and can't replace one another. So this is much more lightweight because it's based on JSON. It can operate either with backchannel or without, and works perfectly for all kinds of applications, either classical monolithic ones or REST web services. Well, finally, CAS. It's kind of a lone wolf here, because the only native implementation of CAS is the eponymous product, Apereo CAS. The protocol itself is not bad at all. Yes, it's quite powerful, but it kind of lacks ecosystem around it. So obviously, our choice is OpenID Connect here. Well, we need to pay credits to the original picture that was about something else. So I'm sorry for the low resolution, because the picture is quite old. So if you like this stuff, and if you want to bring it to your project, what steps do you need to take? Well, probably we should have allocated a hands-on lab for that, but we didn't. So if you want to watch the steps, we can demonstrate it to you, so just find us after the session. And now, just briefly, the steps are, first of all, you need to deploy Keycloak. It's out of the scope of this talk. You need to install Keycloak servlet filter adapter, it is called. Why the latest version of Keycloak? Yes, it was released just a week ago. Only with this version, the adapter has become a first-class OSGI citizen. It has been published in this OSGI bundle and as a Karef feature. So in Karef, it's as easy as adding a feature repository and adding a new feature from Keycloak. On the Sling level, you will need a single class, a small module, authentication handler, because Keycloak, it provides its own kind of security data to the authenticated request, and you need to translate it to something understandable by Oak under the hood. So authentication handler is just for that. We have implemented it and published on GitHub. It's very simple. And optionally, you can configure user provisioning on the Oak level. So the whole section will be dedicated to that.
So in Java terms, what you have to do is first register a servlet filter with your whiteboard, HTTP whiteboard service. So basically, this is everything you have to do. So you register a component, and you put the path for the Keycloak JSON. This is the configuration file that the Keycloak adapter will use to know where the server is going to be. Then we say for what context to apply this adapter. So we are intercepting all Sling requests. And then we add some stuff, some public stuff that's not going to be protected at all. And then on what paths to apply this filter. So the idea is that in your applications, you have to install what is called a Keycloak adapter. The adapter has to intercept every request to your services. And if you are not authenticated, it will redirect you to Keycloak. You are going to authenticate to Keycloak, and then you are going to be redirected back. When you present the proper credentials, which is normally JSON web token, then the adapter can decode that information and can make that information available to Sling via the Sling authentication handler implementation, which is something like this. So I removed most of the loggers and some utility methods, but actually this is the full class of the authentication handler that you can use to have basic authentication with Sling and Keycloak. So of course this can be improved, because right now we authenticate to the JCR repository via admin. This can be improved to get the group and use service users accounts in Sling and whatever. So if you want to see the code, it's going to be available online. The presentation is already available online, so please wait after the talk and you'll get the slides. But everything is put there, and we hope that to push the code in Sling, maybe during the hackathon. So next step is to talk about identity provisioning, how to get users into Sling or Keycloak. So Dmitry.
Thank you. Just to recap the previous part, so Keycloak adapter is an OSGI bundle, but not yet an OSGI component out of the box. So you need to make it one. So that's it. Now, talking about identity provisioning, what it is, what is it? Well, so first we have Sling This picture is oversimplified. Of course, there is auth inside Sling, and there's user database inside auth, probably. And now we introduce a new player to our playground. Keycloak also has to operate the user data. So they got separate databases. And we need to set up somehow so they have a coherent and synchronized view on the user data. So first, but before that, we need to ask a question. Do we really need that? So in fact, on this question, we didn't come to agreement with Eugen while preparing for the session. So maybe a little survey. So imagine that the user is authenticated within your Sling instance. How do you connect to underlying auth repository? Using that user's identity or using a service account? So who uses service accounts? Please raise your hands. Not that much. So this should be a single dedicated account to connect to the repository. And who uses the identity of the real user to connect to auth? A bit more, maybe 3 times more. So if you are using the real identity, then probably you should go for user provisioning. So how do we do that? There are several approaches. First one probably is push provisioning. So in our case, Keycloak will be the master of identity data. And upon each and every change, it should propagate the user changes to auth through Sling. So technically, this could be done by writing the so-called provider extension to Keycloak that will hook to internal events. That's quite easy to do. And will push the data over the REST interface to Sling. The second approach is pull provisioning, or maybe synchronization, we call it in some contexts. That means that in Sling, there should run some periodic task that should poll Keycloak for identity data changes and to pull it. And the third approach is using shared user database. So we do not need any synchronization, push or pull. It will be just an external database that contains user data. So about push and pull provisioning. Is it possible to have that now? Probably no. Why? So if we implement it that way, that I have just described, by creating Keycloak provider that will push something to Sling, we will inevitably introduce kind of vendor lock-in. Yes, the solution won't be universal. So Keycloak is great, but vendor lock-in is not, even with such a great product. What to do? So luckily, there exists an open and standard protocol exactly for that. It is called Simple Cloud Identity Management. It does exactly what is needed. It's also very lightweight. It contains standard schemas for users, roles, and groups, etc. But unfortunately, it is not yet implemented in Sling. Maybe somebody remembers, yesterday I have asked a question about JAX-RS whiteboard. So if we have a third-party library implementing some JAX-RS classes, how easy or hard will it be to bring them to JAX-RS whiteboard? I was meaning that same SIEM SDK from Ping Identity. And good news is that probably soon it will come to Keycloak as a community contribution. So some guys have already implemented it and are about to contribute to Keycloak. And whether it comes to Sling or not, it depends on us entirely. But at the moment, as a probably workaround, yes, we can use LDAP, which is supported universally by both Keycloak and Sling out of the box. So you just configure LDAP on the auth level, you configure it in Keycloak, and they have a single unified view of the user data. The next section, please.
OK, so right now we talked about authentication, and authentication is more or less who you are. That's the part of access control. And authorization is, OK, we know who you are. What can you do in this system? And there are multiple ways of handling authorization. Keycloak actually implements quite a few options in that regard. So right now, if you are integrating Sling and Keycloak together, you have the option of using the auth part of the authorization, the JCR ACLs. And you also have the option of using Sling-based security. And the third option would be to use Keycloak or even mix them together. OK, so I'm not going to talk about access control in Oak, because probably you guys know much more about them than me. I'm also not going to talk about access controls in Sling for the same reasons. And we are going to focus on talking about access control in Keycloak. Keycloak is very powerful, and it can use all declarative or imperative solutions. The idea in that authorization in Keycloak is based on who you are. Okay, so it can use a lot of information when making decisions if you are allowed to do something or not. It can use role-based access control, attribute-based access control, time-based access control, and also custom policies. So the idea is that in Keycloak, you can define a policy that looks at your attributes, looks at your roles, looks at the time of the day, of the weather in the South Pacific, and decides if you are allowed to do an action or not. Okay? So it's very, very powerful. Most of the time, no coding is required for simple access control, and we are going to show you some of that. The drawbacks in using Sling, in using Keycloak, are that it's unfamiliar to most Sling developers, and the policies will live in Keycloak, which is another system. But I think these are small drawbacks compared to the benefits that you get out of it. So a policy can be summarized in something like this: allow content readers access to secured content. And this could be a role-based or a group-based access policy where content readers is a group or a role. Okay, so every user who is in that role or group has access to this path. Sorry. Another example is allow access to content for adaptTo users to all users that have an email that ends with adaptTo. Okay, so this is an example of an attribute-based access, an attribute-based policy. Or you can go wild, and if today is Monday and the weather in Potsdam is sunny and over 30 degrees, then you can close the system so everybody can go and have fun. Okay? So this is an example of a complex policy that you can actually write in Keycloak. And it uses a time-based policy and some access-based policies that, for example, you need to get the weather, so you'll need a service for getting the current weather in Potsdam. Okay? But this is doable. The idea is that you can do this in Keycloak, and it's not that hard. The question is, how hard is it to do in Sling or in Oak? It's probably going to be very hard, next to impossible. And of course, the issue is that usually business people change their minds, and they come up with all sorts of crazy ideas on how to allow people access to do something or deny them access to some content. Okay. So next, we have prepared another demo to show some of these access policies, and I'll invite Dmitry to present it. We wanted to show you on the system that you could also share, but we broke it during the morning, as I said earlier. So he's going to show it on his local host. The idea is that we have built Docker images for Keycloak, and we have Kara features and instructions in the presentation. So you will be able to test it out after the presentation. We will give you the slides and the instructions so you can do them. I will probably prepare a video on showing you how to do that so you can have it after it. Okay? Mm-hmm. Please.
Thank you. So I have opened an incognito window. I'm trying to log into Sling as user GRRM. We have configured a multifactor authentication, so you probably not see it from your seats, but I've got a small device that resembles a flash drive, but with a button. So I'm entering the PIN code. I'm pressing the button. It generates the rest, the one-time password. We log in. And what do we see here? There is a secret area. Oops. Yes, this is just kidding. This is intentional. That is because on that secret area, there is a policy that requires that the user be in the role content authors. And now I need to go to Keycloak console.
Can you show the console?
Just a sec.
So Keycloak brings some other functionality. So you have an admin console to manage users, policies, and access control. It also has a user console, so you can manage so each user has access to his username, password, time zone. So he can easily edit those informations for you. And if you are implementing stuff like GDPR, where this is mandated by GDPR, that will come in very handy because you get them for free with Keycloak, which is an appliance.
I have just added the role content editors to the user.
So you see GRRM is the user, and we have assigned the role content editor.
So let's reload. And we are let in the secure area.
Yeah,
and
now we can access the
some secret link, an unpublished book. Yeah, that's it.
No surprise there.
So that's all for the second demo.
OK, so our work was mainly to push the code in Keycloak to the OSGI part. So we actually, Dmitry managed to do that last week. So with version 4.4.0, there is support for OSGI in the official Keycloak implementation. So it's very easy to add Keycloak support for all of your OSGI application, whether they are Sling or not. And in the future, some of the things that could be improved is we should be able to use config-admin to allow for Keycloak multi-tenancy. That means that Keycloak has a concept of realms. A realm is like a collection of groups, roles, users. And you can have multiple realms in your organizations for different. Each realm will have its users. And the idea is that you should be able to have a multi-tenancy. So if you have a Sling deployment or an OSGI app that is deployed, you should be able to use in the same application multiple realms from Keycloak. So that's a way to implement the multi-tenancy. Another.
I think we got enough time to speak about a little bit about realms in Keycloak.
Yeah, please.
So in Keycloak, everything is done on the realm basis, and the realms are isolated from each other, and all the users, groups, roles, clients, permissions, policies, everything exists per realm. So you can treat it as a kind of small mini instance of authentication server inside Keycloak. So they are completely independent. And multi-tenancy in Keycloak is basically about selecting a realm or maybe another instance of Keycloak based on runtime data. So based on incoming requests, for example. So if one URL is requested, so it can use one Keycloak instance for authentication, and another the same way. So you've got one instance of Sling application, but it will serve your different tenants that way.
Yeah, thanks. So the other option is to integrate Keycloak directly with Oak. And this comes from talking to some of you guys, actually Bertrand, who mentioned that, for example, some people have large Sling deployments and they store users in Oak. The idea is that when you are storing millions of users in Oak, the performance issues start to come up. So the idea is to delegate all of the user management to Keycloak and integrate Oak at the JCR level, at the Oak level with Keycloak, so that when you do JCR queries or Oak queries, content is filtered based on whether you have access to that content or not. Right now, the integration that we have, the Sling-based integration, doesn't cater that need. So if you want, you'll have to implement that in the application level. So right now, we treat basically Oak or JCR, we treat it as a dumb storage space where we store content and we don't leverage the JCR queries for filtering content and hiding content that's not available for all of users. Another option is to use to implement SIM for easier provisioning of users in Sling and Keycloak. So. Okay, this is the last section of the talk before Q&A. So about us, this is our first talk together. We met on the mailing list. Our shared interests were Keycloak and Sling, and we decided to apply for adaptTo because we didn't find a lot of information on any of these subjects, and we thought about doing some work that will benefit a lot of people. And I think it's pretty interesting. We just met yesterday, and this is our talk. So if we didn't perfectly synchronize, yeah, that's our excuse. So Dmitry, if you want to talk more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great pleasure. So I'm currently working at a Kutas company. We're a Czech Republic based, and we offer among other things, Keycloak-related services like consulting, support, and training. Also, I'm a freelance architect and consultant in the same area. I contribute to Magia Linux. I'm a package maintainer there. And as soon as we have enough time, and I can probably elaborate a bit on my favorite topic. So, as an amateur musician and arranger, I work with session musicians. And you know what? Quite a bunch of data that you need to exchange with them. And it is normally, well, not normally, it is done in email or social networks. And my dream is to create a kind of system for musical collaboration, so people could work on musical scores together and share the data, kind of like great recordings or rehearsals or scores or scans in a convenient way. And the very first question when I started architecting the system was authentication. Because yes, you can give the link to the musician. Okay, hi, there is a link to your part. But you know what? You will need to register. Yeah, you will need to create a password that should be at least 8 symbols long. There should be at least 2 digits. There should be a special character. And probably the musician will answer, what? Are you kidding me? Just send it by email like before. So, and I thought that if we integrate, Sling, to me, seemed like perfect candidate from the technical standpoint. But the problem, the first one that should have been solved was authentication. So integrating Sling with Keycloak makes the musical part just 2 clicks away from the musician. So unfortunately, there is nothing on that link. It is on the very early stages of conception, and I hope I will have a chance to talk about it at adaptTo 2019, hopefully.
Thanks. I hope to see that as well. And a few words about me. I'm Eugen Stan. I'm passionate about business and technology, and I do some freelance architecture and consulting. I currently work for great people inside. I'm also managing the team and finding technologies on how to deliver the SaaS platform, which is one of my biggest interests. I'm an open source contributor, member of the Apache Software Foundation for Apache James, but I'm not very active on that. I also use Debian, and I'm a contributor on that part. Other interests are Kubernetes, container, Java, all around this. And I think that's it about us. And we have time for Q&A. If you would like to check out the platform, you can show it there. And let me see if I can open it right now. So in this, yeah, it's going to take some time. Oh, I'm glad we didn't do the demo. OK, so this is how the login page for this, the online demo looks. We have implemented integration with Facebook, which took me like 15 minutes to do. We also have enabled features like Remember Me, user registration, so you could register and create users and access the Sling application, which has another URL. And you can also register with Facebook. It will create your account, and you will be able to see the users there. Unfortunately, I don't know if we have access to. OK. Yeah. So please ask questions. I'm just filling time. I'm going to shut up.
Thank you very much for your talk.
OK.
Any questions? Yes. There's one over there. Sure.
It's more an observation that I would like to make. One of the key things, I think, in Sling and Oak is that the access control is defined in the content, and I think that's very important. And by handling it at the application level, you change the model, which is totally fine in certain cases. But I think it would be great if you can, you mentioned the possibility of doing that inside Oak. I suppose that's not easy, but that would be really cool, because then you go back to the model where the access control is defined in the content. And if you move something, for example, the access control moves with it, which is not the case if you have to define it on path. So just a motivation to do that, and also a challenge, because I suppose that's not easy.
So if I get it right, so there are several options to do ACLs. So with the introduction of Keycloak, you can stick with old style, Oak style ACLs or JCR ICLs. You can do ACLs on the Sling level, on application level, or you can use Keycloak authorization services. They are not mutually exclusive. You can use them all together. But in that case, there are things you should bear in mind. That your access control code will be split, distributed between several entities. And you have to remember about the order of invocation. So first, Keycloak kicks in, because it's a thorough filter. Everything happens before actual access to the repository. Then, if I'm not mistaken, if you implement some ACLs on the Sling level, and finally, the ACLs on Oak. Or I might be mistaken about the last two steps. So Keycloak is always first, and the ACLs in Oak are after that.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I just wanted to specify that, you know, at the original design of Sling, the idea was to delegate all the authentication authorization to the content repository in JCR. Mm-hmm. And then if you can in turn delegate that to Keycloak, that might be very interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but because at least for the users, it makes a lot of sense to do that.
That was mentioned in our future plans.
Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, so if I might give it a shot as well, the idea is that Keycloak allows you to, when you do authorization, which is different from the authentication, when you do authorization, you can take information from a lot of places. And you can also take information from the context in which you are. So if you are trying to access a specific Sling resource, then Sling probably identified the resource, and you can read the Sling resource type. So you can push that type into the Keycloak authorization context. So you know that you are trying to authorize access for user A, and the access is for a Sling resource type of that type, or with that path and whatever stuff. So basically, you could create policies that takes all this information into account and makes the decision based on that.
Yep, that sounds cool. Thank you.
I don't know about the performance of that, but yeah.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. My question will be just, who takes the responsibility on runtime to enforce the authorization? Because I saw that you modified on the back office of Keycloak the policy, and it takes place on the live application. So is it agent-based? Is it the handler that you the filter that you set that took the configuration from the other system?
Do you want to give it a try, or?
So all the heavy lifting is done by the Keycloak adapter.
Yeah.
So inside, it connects to, under the hood, it connects to Keycloak. Yes, in the case of if you decide to use authorization services, you need back channel. So your application has to have connectivity to Keycloak server. So under the hood, the Keycloak adapter, upon receiving incoming request, it will, on the back channel, connect to Keycloak to request authorization services for the decision for authorization. Of course, it will cache something, so it doesn't request Keycloak per each incoming request. So that's it. It is done on the Keycloak adapter level.
Yeah, and so the idea is that so when the authorization is done, you get a bunch of tokens, and you can either, if the tokens contain enough information, you can make the decisions based on the tokens, because Keycloak can push into the tokens claims. The claims are what you can say about someone. So you can use just the token, or if that is not enough and you are doing some fancy stuff, then it will call Keycloak, and Keycloak implements a policy enforcement provider or something like that. So Keycloak, you provide him all the information, and Keycloak will say you are okay, access or not.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
Okay, then again, thank you for your talk
Thank
on
you.
stage.